We mentioned yesterday about the Nazir that why does the Torah juxtapose the Nazir to the Sota? If a person witnesses and sees the Sota, the Kukula, in the consequences of behavior, and seeing how she dies due to the adultery which she committed, he should enter into a state of Nazirus that he's not permitted to drink wine. So we mentioned yesterday that Nazirus is more than just making a vow, you're not going to drink wine. Could have said, wine is off limits to me. When he says Haredi Nazir, he's entering into another state of being, a state of holiness and purity, whereas we'll see he's not permitted to contaminate to the 7 closest relatives as a Kohen Gadol. He's not permitted to cut his hair. He's not permitted to contaminate the dead, any dead, including the closest relatives. Only the Mes Mitzvah, as a Kohen Gadol, is permitted to contaminate to the Mes Mitzvah. A Jew whose burial needs are not attended to by a Jew, he's permitted to, as the Kohen Gadol. But outside of that, it's not. It's more than just not drinking wine or eating a grape. It's entering into a state, as it's referred to as Neze Kodesh al Rosho. He has a holy crown on his head when he enters into the state, and therefore we have all these other laws which pertain to him, the laws of purity and not being permitted to cut his hair, as we're going to discuss. Because the question is, if in fact it's wine that brought about, which ultimately precipitated this relation, which led to adultery, just make a neder. I will not drink wine. He should make a neder and not to drink wine. And he has to enter a state of Nazirus, which as a result of that, one of the things which is not permitted is wine. So I mentioned yesterday that wine brought to Niyuf. It brought to this adulterous act. Many things we know are not permitted. But yet, as I said, to be able to internalize them, you have to have a capacity to appreciate how wrong they are. So to fully, it's not a question of comprehension. As I always say, Ezel Chocham Haroas Hanolad. Who is the wise man, the one who sees the ramifications or what's going to happen because? That's Roeh. It doesn't say Ezel Chocham Hamivinus Hanolad. The Chocham understands the consequences or the ramifications. What's Riyah? The Gemara says, Lo Teshmi Gedolam Riyah. That hearing cannot be greater than seeing, witnessing. Seeing, as we say, seeing is believing. Seeing is reality. When you hear something or you learn something, you understand it, but it does not have the same reality as seeing something. A Chocham, because he's a Chocham, he has the ability to internalize the truth of whatever that is, and because of that, he has a sense of what the ramifications are going to be, what the consequences are going to be. That's Roeh, said Nolan. So if a person himself would just make a vow, I will not drink wine, knowing what wine brought about, in terms of the actual message, to resonate, to be impacted, to be fully, have the capacity to appreciate the consequences and the evil of wine, a person will not. You know what? It brought about this tragedy. But to have that sense, to internalize it, you have to, it's like an orientation, you have to enter into a state of purity, and the Torah prescribes what that state is. The 30 days, minimally, you're not permitted to cut your hair. You're not permitted to contaminate yourself to the dead. You're not permitted to eat any grape derivative, wine. All these things combined, as a result of that, that's called Nezer Kodesh. You have the crown of holiness on your head. As a result of that, you have a capacity to fully internalize the wrong that took place. And as a result of that, you're going to stay away from this. You become the Chacham in this area, you Roas HaNolad. Until then, you don't have the Riyah. You understand it. You're Maven. You understand the Nolad, but you're not Roas HaNolad. To be Roas HaNolad, it's the orientation. Torah prescribes the orientation for this particular area. You have to enter the state of Nazirus. And what is that? Behind the Sheikh Yazer, Chometz, Yayin, Chometz Sheikher, vinegar, wine vinegar, or the vinegar from something which already had alcohol. If you soak wine, is, let's say you soak grapes in water, or bread is dipped into wine, that's Mishra, soaking. Whether it's grapes or raisins, dried, whatever is a derivative of the vine, you're not permitted, whether it's the grape skins, whether it's the grape seeds, you're not permitted. The days of the Nazirus, a tar. We'll see it's not only a tar is a straight blade. A razor, you should not cut his hair, even a scissor. It's not permitted. Ad melos hayomim asher yazil Hashem. Until the days that he had entered in Nazirus, till those days pass, he's not permitted to cut his hair. Kadosh yeh. He's kadosh, he's holy. Therefore, gadol peres sarosha. Therefore, because he's holy, he must grow the crop of hair. What's considered a growth? A 30-day growth. He has to have a 30-day growth. The Gemara says in Nazir, what happens? A Nazir, he's his hair, he did everything right, and before the 30-day period comes, he's taken by non-Jews and they cut his hair. So when the 30-day comes, he doesn't have that hair to cut, because the Torah says at when he concludes counting the days in the Nazirus, he has a 30-day growth, and he takes that 30-day growth and he cuts it and he burns it under the Korban Shlomim when they cook it in the Beis Hamikdash. Said he has to have 30 days. He has to, even though he counted all his days of Nazirus, but since he no longer has the crop because they cut his hair earlier, as a result of that, he has to end his time because he has to have the crop of hair to cut. Gadol peres sarosho. Kol yimei haziro l'Hashem al nefesh mes lo yovo. All the days that he's in the Nazirus, he's not permitted to come upon the dead. And it goes and delineates identical to the Kohen Gadol. La'aviv l'imo la'ochiv la'choso l'yitam l'hem b'mosam ki nezer elokova rosho. Because the crown of God is on his head. Kol yimei nizro, all the days of his Nazirus, his Naziritehood, kodeshu l'Hashem. So over here, Rashi, if you take a look at Ches, Kol yimei nizro kodeshu, all the days of his Nazirus, he's kodosh, zukdush saguf. Just as a Kohen, his kedusha is innate in his being because he's a Kohen. Like when you consecrate an animal, the animal is called kudush saguf. The animal is consecrated. It's not the value. The essence of the animal has a consecrated state. The Kohen has a consecrated state. The Nazir, when he enters into the state of Nazirus, he's kodushu. Torah says, kudush saguf b'letame l'mesim. And therefore, for that reason, is not permitted to contaminate to the dead. We had mentioned, according to Reb Meir, the fruit of the Eitz Hadas was the grape. Because he says, the grape wine brings about the greatest tragedy on humanity. So it makes sense the greatest tragedy that was ever brought upon humanity was Adam's eating of the tree of knowledge. If he wouldn't have eaten, what followed wouldn't follow, meaning the world would have reached its state of perfection, suffering, the world would have been eternity in that perfect state. Because he ate of the tree of knowledge, For the past thousands of years, we've been going through whatever we've been going through because of that mistake, that sin that he had done. So we see the grape brought about the greatest tragedy. Therefore, Rebbeir says it makes sense to say that what fruit brings about the greatest tragedy in humanity? It's the grape. So what are we doing? According to Rebbeir, the Nazir is a replication of what Adam would have been before the Eitz Hadas. Before Adam made of the Eitz Hadas, there was no death. There was no death. It's only because he ate. Therefore, that's the reason why he became subject to death. Meaning that fruit represented tov v'ra, good and evil. It brings that about. Therefore, as a result of that, just as Adam, before eating of the tree of knowledge, there was no death, there was no such thing as contamination. This person, being in this state, he's being elevated to that state of Adam Kodem Achet. As the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol, we said, he is a representation of Adam Kodem Achet. Therefore, Kohen Gadol is not permitted to what? He's not permitted to contaminate to anybody, to any of his relatives, even his closest relatives. And as I said, any Kohen is not permitted to drink wine. He becomes disqualified, and if he officiates, it's not valid, it's Torah violation. If he officiates, even if he drinks as much as a Revius. But that's even an ordinary Kohen. The Kohen Gadol, he himself, he's the ultimate. He is a replication, a representation of Adam Kodem Achet. I'd once mentioned the name of Rabbeinu Bachio. He cites a Pirkei Rebbe Lezer that Adam before the Chet had no hair on his body. Hair itself was only a consequence, a derivative of the Eitz Hadas. As we had mentioned that the orla, the foreskin, was only an expression of the Ra, of the Eitz Hadas. It causes, it's a covering. Identically, the hair is what, that itself was an expression of the Ra, of the evil of the Eitz Hadas. As a result of this, what is the concept of Nazir? He grows the crop. It's not that he's not permitted to cut his hair because he's not permitted to cut his hair. What does he do after 30 days? He removes the hair to burn it. So he has to have the hair. What does hair represent? The hair represents the Ra, the evil of the Eitz Hadas. He's in the state of purity, and what does he do when he concludes? He concludes, he takes it, he burns it. That's the halacha. There's halacha Kohen, if he doesn't cut his hair for 30 days and he officiates, it's called Pruei Rosh, the service is not valid. A Kohen, he has to take a haircut once every 30 days. He cannot go beyond 30, and officiates with a 30-day crop, the vote is not valid. We see over here what is considered the hair which represents Ra. And therefore he removes it to Nazir to burn. It's a 30-day crop. A Kohen officiates with a 30-day crop and he hadn't cut it sooner, the avoda is what? The avoda is not valid. Again, because this is a representation of the Ra. As we say, the grape is a representation of the Chet. And any Kohen who has relevance to that, the service is not valid. The Kohen who officiates with a crop of hair, which is 30 days, the service is not valid. And it's a Torah violation for a Kohen. Now, we find that it's interesting. At the end of, towards the end of Vayikra, it says, Lahavdil ben ator ben atome. Lavdil ben ator ben atome. So Rashi over there cites the Medrash. What's Lahavdil ben atome? Is it between a chamor and a shor, a donkey and an ox? When we say you have to discern, discerning means you have to really, it's not as obvious to discern. An ox has two kosher signs. A donkey has only one kosher sign. It has no kosher signs. So it's obvious. So what's lahabdu ben ator ben atome? Ben shchuta chetzir shchuta rubo. What's ritual slaughter? You have to cut the majority of the esophagus and the trachea. You have to cut the majority of the Shnei Simonim. That's called ritual slaughter. What happens if you cut exactly 50% and not the majority? It's an avela. It's not valid. It's not a valid shechita. It's like as if you didn't slaughter it. So Rashi brings Chazal. And what's the difference between 50% and majority? You know, Rashi says, quoting Chazal, chut hasaro. It's a hair. That's the difference between 50% and what? And a little more than 50%. A hairbreadth. Rashi could have said, as other places, it says from Chazal, it could have said it's a thread. The thickness of a thread, which is similar to a hairbreadth. But Rashi is no chut hasaro. It's not right. Rashi is quoting Chazal. What's Sar? What does Sar represent? Sar represents Tumah. Sar is a derivative of what? Of the Chet of Adam Rishon. Therefore, Chazal say that when we say Lahavdil ben Atom ben Ator, to discern between Tor and Tomei, it's not the ox and the donkey, which is obvious. It's obvious. That's not a discernment. It's like day and night. It's black and white. Something that you have to look more closely at. And what is this slight difference? Now, when does a person become an adult? If a girl is 12 years old and a boy is 13 years old, is he an adult? With that alone, just age. So the Gemara says age alone is not enough, doesn't cause adulthood. It's adulthood is years plus puberty. You have to have puberty plus years. If you have puberty before years, the child is a minor. If you have years without puberty, person is a minor. If you have the years with puberty, that's an adult. What's the difference between an adult and a minor? Whether there's liability for one's actions. The actions, both positive and negative, assume value only once you enter into adulthood. What we call a godel. A koton, a minor, has no liability because his actions have no ramifications at any level. An adult, the actions have great ramifications, have great innate value. Now, when does he become an adult? Years are not enough. You have to have puberty, meaning when the hair starts growing. What is puberty? That's sar. Sar itself is what does sar represent? Sar represents that's chet. So when the hair starts growing, then the consequence of actions have that level of ramification. That's why it's specifically sar. When a person sits shiva, or is in a state of mourning, he's not permitted to cut his hair. Why? He'd say because he should be in a disheveled state. He's disheveled. He's not permitted to cut his hair. But it's even more than that. According to this Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, what does hair represent? Hair is a derivative of what? A consequence of death. So since the child or the relative is mourning the loss of his loved one who's closest to him, how does one actually grieve over that? By not cutting hair. Because the hair, again, represents as a derivative, that's a derivative of death. Only once he ate of the tree of knowledge and became subject to death, only then did Adam Rishon, did the human being have hair for the same reason. But that's what it represents. So the Nazir, he has the crop of hair for 30 days, he grows it to cut it off, to remove it, to burn. Because he achieved, he entered in this state of purity, of holiness. It's called Neza Kodesh. But we see something here. It's only once he has the Neza Kodesh does the event of the Sota, does it resonate within him, and only then does it leave the indelible effect on him, does he have a full appreciation for the consequences of wine. Therefore, Roa Sota B'Chlukulo Yazer Atzmin Yayin. That's it's not just to make a neder. It's entering into the state of being, of holiness. And when you're steady at that holiness, only then are you able to fully internalize and absorb the event which took place. When you go on now, from now on, you become a different person. We're going to see over here something interesting. And there's a famous Ramban. The Nazir, when he finishes his 30 days, what does he have to do? He has to bring korbanos. One of the korbanos he brings is the chatos, the sin offering. Without speaking, he contaminated himself. What does he bring a chatos? Chatos you always bring when you transgressed. So the Gemara says, but it's being specific in another case, that it's a Nazir who becomes Tomei, who becomes contaminated. He has to start counting all over again. So that's understandable. He has to bring a chatos. But if he fulfilled his 30 days properly, wasn't contaminated, did not drink wine, did not cut his hair, he brings a chatos. Why? He did everything perfectly. So Ramban says something very beautiful. The Nazir, when he enters into a state of Nazirus, he ascends to a level of Kedusha. So the chatos is because now he's leaving that special state, entering into an ordinary state of being, to function within a lesser state. The chatos is from coming down from that elevated state to an ordinary state. That's the chatos. According to what we're explaining, just clarifies it even greater. Who's the Nazir? He's Nazir Kodesh al Rosha. He has the crown of holiness on his head. He's Kodosh. He has Kedushas Aguf. He's innately holy. And that's why all these things are a derivative of what? Of that innate holiness. He assumes the same status as the Kohen Gadol. If you could remain in that state and now you leave that state, that's a come down. So leaving that state, you have to bring the chatos to address that re-entering into an ordinary state. That's the Ramban. Pasuk Yud Gimel, Parshas Naso. Zos Torah HaNazir. This is the law of the Nazir. B'yom Melos Yimei Nizro. When he completes the days of his Naziritehood, Yavi Oso El Pesach Ol Moed. Okay. The Hikr of his Karban of Hashem. He brings his Karban to Hashem. Kevis Ben Shnoso Tomim Echod La'olah. The Kapsta Achas Bashnosa Tmim B'Lachatos. He brings a male. For Olah, burnt offering is only a male. Female. A chatos is always a female. The sheep is a female. Kapsa Achas Bashnosa Tmim B'Lachatos. Ayal Echod Tomim L'Shlomim. And an ayal, that's a sheep which is more than a year old, is L'Shlomim, for a peace offering. So you take a look in the Ramban. This is the Ramban I mentioned to you. I mean, the man himself just entered into a state of purity, which is one of a kind. He's equivalent of Adam before the Chet, as the Kohen Gadol. But when he completes counting those days and everything's perfect, he brings the Olah, the Chatos, and the Shlomim. So the Ramban, if you have a Megros Gadol, is Chumash. The Tama Chatos Sheyakrev and Nozir B'Yom Los Yimei Yisrael. The reason, the rationale, why does the Nazir bring the Chatos when he completes counting his days? Lo nisparish. There's no explanation. Well, derech hapshat, he says, but the way he understands it, the simple understanding would be, this person is sinning in terms of his soul when he completes it. Because now he's being separated from that special level of Kedusha and the service Hashem when he was in the state. Really, he should have been in the state forever. That's how special the state is. And his whole life, he should be in a state of Naziritehood, sanctified for Hashem. That would have been the ultimate. As it says in Amos, I will establish from your children prophets and from your youth Nazirim. So we see from the Pasuk, we're equating the Nazir to the Navi. Just as that Navi the prophet has a special relation with Hashem, he has a capacity always to receive that communication. The Nazir is similar. He's at that special level. Receive Kol Yemei Nizru Kodoshu Hashem, as the Pasuk said, all the days of his Nazirus, he's sanctified for Hashem. Vine hu tzorach kaporo b'shuvo litomi b'tayvus olam. He has to be atoned because now he's re-entering into the world to be contaminated with the desires of the world. He's coming back down from cloud 9 into the reality of life, which is all the passions and all the desires which are permitted. On the normal situation, he's not in violation. But coming from that level, coming down, it's a problem.
Robert.
Wait. I was just thinking, the Gemara tells us, based on a pasuk, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mendaktik im chasidov, im tzadikov kechut hasara. Hashem is exacting with his tzaddik, even if he violates as much as a hairbreadth. Also, again, achut hasara, as we discussed earlier, doesn't say as much as a thread, as much as a sar. What does sar represent? Sar represents that's chet. That's a derivative of the Eitzadas. But you think a person's tzaddik? Why should HaKadosh Baruch Hu be medacting tzaddik of chut hasara? According to what the Ramban is saying, who is the tzaddik? The tzaddik is a special level. When he deviates, even as much as hairbreadth, he's coming down from that special level. He's achieved a certain level of kedusha. So due to his lack of cognizance, which is attributed to himself, he's coming down from that. It's like the Nazir coming out of that special state, re-entering into an ordinary state. But if you're there, how do you allow yourself to re-enter into an ordinary state? Therefore, he needs a chatos. That's as the Ramban's explained in Nazir. Identity, the tzaddik, having that level of clarity, now due to a level of lack of clarity, that's why he sinned. As a result of that, that's his level of culpability. That's why he has that liability of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Dagdek Hashem is exacting with the tzaddik chut hasara. That's one way to understand it, based on what the Ramban is saying.